Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I want to talk to you about commitment because this seems to be a really big issue in our culture because so many people seem to have commitment issues. We don't like to kind of nail down ourselves in a particular area, and yet this is a massive problem, and this lack of commitment may be the very thing that's messing up our life. And it may not, if you're a believer, it may even be messing up our ability to hear what the Lord's saying to us because we have a commitment issue that we have been impacted by culture far more than we actually realize. So if you want to stay tuned to this, I'm going to be right back. Take this time to like and subscribe to this channel. Share it if you want to share it. Comment down below if you have other questions or comments. But let's get started. Psalm 92:13 says this: "They are planted in the house of the Lord, they flourish in the courts of our God." So flourishing happens as we plant. And how many know when you see a tree, the degree in which it grows is dependent, in most cases, on how deep the roots are. And the trees, like those big giant redwood trees, they actually don't have very deep roots, but they're also easily pushed over if they're not with other big redwoods. They're so huge, but the issue, if they don't have roots, they're easily able to be pushed over. And that's why if you ever go visit, there are many of them have been fallen down. You can drive cars through them and walk through them, but we need roots. But here's the issue. In our culture, we don't commit. We don't commit in relationships. We don't commit to so much in our friendships, even in our families, in churches, in our jobs. We go from one relationship, we go from one church, we go from one job to the next over and over and over again. This is a problem. And so sometimes even as Christians, if people who are spiritual, they might even over-spiritualize it and say, well, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go do another one. And this is actually great faith, and I'm being spiritual because it's kind of a risk. Now, does that mean that you can never change your job? Of course not. Sometimes God does lead us to change our jobs, and sometimes it is a risk. But when you have someone who has a pattern of starting a job, quitting a job, starting a job, quitting a job, it likely has nothing to do with God. It probably has to deal with a spiritual immaturity problem. So how do we deal with that? Well, first of all, you have to recognize the root. What is the root of the problem? And for different people, it might be different reasons. And for somebody, there actually might be a few combinations of reasons. So here are some of the possible roots to people not being willing to commit. This could be to a job or in a relationship. So if you're here and you're single and you're thinking about marrying someone, well, how are they at their commitments? Because that really is a big factor. But here are some potential roots of the problems. Number one is pride. Sometimes people don't think about anybody but themselves. If, as a husband and a father, if I were to ever quit a job, I should not just be thinking about myself. I also have to consider my wife and my family. Now, there have been times that the Lord has led me to take steps of faith. That does happen. But again, when there's a pattern, there's this thing of I'm going to quit, I'm going to start, I'm going to quit, I'm going to start. It may be a pride that they don't actually like to commit and submit to any leadership. They get sick of doing the same thing, which leads to number two, could be laziness. Laziness is a massive problem in our culture. We often don't know what hard work is about. In fact, we often try to find jobs that have less hard work. And often when someone does the same job over and over and over again, it can reveal laziness because they haven't built up endurance. And this is, the Apostle Paul tells us that we need to finish the race and build up endurance. And of course, he's talking about finishing this walk as a believer. But as a believer, we also have to pay bills, and we also honor and worship God as we work. We don't just worship God through singing. We worship God as we work. And some people have not learned how to actually worship God through their work, because when you worship God in your work, you can do anything, even a mundane task, with excitement and with joy because you're doing it unto the Lord. Another issue, and this can be someone who seems to be overly spiritual or they think themselves as a mature believer, is Gnosticism. So one way that Gnosticism could rear its ugly head is where someone tries to say something like this: oh, well, I just love God so much. I'm committed to God. So I'm going to pray for hours and I'm not going to do my job, and I'm going to have my spouse work extra hard, and or I'm going to do these spiritual things, but my friends can't depend on me. I'm not going to show up when I say I'm going to show up. Problem is, that's a bull-faced lie. There's another word for it, but I can't say it on video, but it's a bunch of junk. How do I know that? Well, because it's one of the fruits of the Spirit. One of the fruits of the Spirit is faithfulness. Faithfulness is the ability to be utterly reliable. So if I say I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there. If that's my job, I'm going to work hard at it. You can depend on me. It's also self-control. The fruit of self-control is doing what's important, not what's urgent. And sometimes people try to use God to justify their own flightiness, their own pride, their own laziness. Their laziness is one of the biggest things I see people use this. So because it allows them to be able to kind of flow whenever they want. Well, sorry I was late. I had a moment with God. Now, can that sometimes happen? Of course, sometimes there are these moments that those things happen. However, someone who's lazy, someone who's prideful, someone who's rooted in doing things their own way will often try to use God to justify their own issues. That's Gnosticism. They don't look at work with spiritual eyes. They look at it as, oh, that's just not that important. And so they over-spiritualize and go, oh, well, God is telling me to change these things because I no longer like this job. And so this is a pattern of someone who comes off spiritual, or who says, or at least gives a spiritual reason, but in the reality it's Gnostic. It is not the Holy Spirit, it is their flesh, and they're using spiritual things to justify their own laziness or pride. Laziness because they don't have the endurance to actually work hard and keep working hard, or pride because they just don't like people to tell them what to do. Some people just do not like to have a boss, and the first time they ask too much of them, they're gone. That's pride. That's not being spiritually mature. That's actually revealing a great spiritual immaturity. As Christians, we should be the hardest workers. We should be the most committed. And our bosses and peers in our job should speak highly of how we work. If we're not, then we're not reflecting the Lord, and we're probably not worshiping Him either, because if we worshiped Him, we'd be giving our best in whatever we do. Kind of a word that's used for this, someone who just can't commit to something, is what we call wonderlust. They're always seeing the grass is greener on the other side. Something's always better if they go and change something. And this speaks to a great spiritual immaturity, because they can never really be happy with where they're at. It doesn't matter if it's a job or a relationship, or sometimes even like hobbies and things of that nature. They always have to change things. This is wonderlust, where there's not a discipline of the heart and mind, where it's always going to be better the next time around. And this is, I kind of give this example from time to time. Sometimes we have people in our lives who go around the same mountain over and over and over again, and they never learn. This happens when their relationships break up, when they lose the job, or a friendship breaks up, or they end up moving again, is that there's an issue in their life, and God keeps giving them opportunities to deal with it, but because they keep changing things and going, oh, this is the next great thing. This is even God. He's giving me a new opportunity. The problem is they're actually not following the Lord, because He's trying to deal with them in a situation, and they're not allowing them to do it. If the Lord is teaching someone steadfastness or perseverance or endurance or tenacity, He will give them a situation sometimes that's challenging. But if a person who's spiritually immature comes to that point, they get bored and they have to do something different, say, oh, well, the Lord's doing it, when in reality, the Lord might be sitting there going, I'm trying to teach you to be stronger, because there are other things I have for you, but you're not ready for it. You're not mature enough. You're not strong enough, because you keep going around this same little hill, and there's other things I want you to be doing. Also, someone who struggles with wonderlust, or grass is always greener on the other side, they will keep other people in their lives from commitment as well. They won't want them to commit, because then if they commit, it will mess up their laziness or pride, that they cannot commit as much as their spouse, or as much as a family member or a friend. And so this is something that they will keep other people, and they will use sometimes spiritual means, sometimes logical means, some by bullying, some by manipulation, to keep someone they care about from committing beyond what they're comfortable with. Now, there is something to be said about boundaries and making sure that, work and jobs don't crush our family. But the truth is that whenever we are called by God to do something, it always requires a level of sacrifice. And if we're going to honor God with our spouse or our children, we have to be willing to sacrifice, because one day we will stand before God and give an account for what we did on this earth, but also how we influenced other people on this earth. So I'll give you an example as a husband. Actually the term husband is a term of like raising up plants and things of that nature. And as a husband, I want my wife to flourish. She has giftings I don't have. She has limitations I don't have. She has personality giftings I don't have. She has desires and dreams I don't have. And so if you were to take different types of plants, the requirements to help them grow may be different. There are some plants that are small but beautiful, and then there are some things that grow large and strong. See, if I try to limit my wife, let's just assume my wife is better at a lot of things than me. Well, if I'm insecure and I'm wonderlust and I'm always seeing the next thing, well, I won't want my wife to commit to anything that would prevent me from being able to pick up and move on again. Well, guess what? I am preventing my wife from planting. Therefore, she'll never grow. She may not be meant to be like us. She may be better at things. She might be even better in her job than you are at some point. But it's my job as a husband to help my wife to flourish. Sometimes as guys can get insecure and we don't want our wives to explore some of our giftings. And I understand there's seasons and times when there's kids involved and there's things to work out. Obviously there's grace and there's mercy. We have 4 kids. We understand that. We're in a season right now where my wife is primarily focusing on being a mom, but I know her hearts and dreams and I want her to flourish. The problem I see a lot is that one spouse will put limitations on another spouse that will never allow them to grow to the full extent that God wants to grow them. Sometimes that's because the one spouse has less of a capacity or less of a desire or less of a spiritual gifting than the other one. And yet, if me as a husband, if my wife is supposed to grow, but I only grow like high and wide, but I only help her to grow to here, I have to stand before the Lord. The question is we have to sit there and go, Lord, am I helping my spouse grow to the maximum of their potential of what you are calling them to do? And then am I willing to make that sacrifice to help them go to that point? And if you're single, you want to ask that question. Am I willing to be a part of their sanctification process? I need to know what their strengths are and their weaknesses. Do I want to help be a change agent to help them grow in those areas and encourage in the areas that need to be encouraged? If not, then you need to rethink the situation. Also, sometimes people do wonderlust, as I mentioned before, is pride because we do not want to submit. We don't want people to speak into our lives. We only want it to some degree when maybe we have questions. And we also don't want accountability. And sometimes people have a messed up concept of what accountability is. Sometimes people only think they need accountability if they're addicted to drugs or pornography or losing weight or whatever it might be. No, we all need accountability. If people don't know your junk beyond your spouse, if people don't have the ability to speak into your life, if your accountability is far away and they don't see your situation as it is, that's not accountability. In fact, you can tell someone's making decisions that are not based in accountability when they're getting feedback primarily from people who aren't in the situations, who haven't seen the scenarios. I've seen this play out in ministry all the time and in marriages. They want something to happen, so they don't talk to the people in their inner circle. They get someone outside of it who doesn't know their current situation or circumstances because they're more likely to be able to shape the narrative for those people to say what they want to hear. See, here's one of the great lies of our culture. We have a tendency to think that commitments will ruin my heart's desires, that commitments are things that hinder my true fulfillment. And yet studies have drop-kicked this in the teeth over and over and over again because they found that people who have solid commitments are far more likely to have a higher quality of life. That people who have jobs or who are committed in their churches, people who are committed in relationships and friendships and families have a much higher level of fulfillment. But often we look at these jobs or relationships or commitments as things that will limit our fun. But in reality, it's the opposite. I can speak from personal experience. And the reason why I'm passionate about this is because I was the person who would not commit. I was afraid if I committed in this relationship or in this job, I would miss out on an opportunity. I would not be able to move when I need to move. Why? Because I had built up a pattern from my family. We moved every 2 to 3 years. So I couldn't have anything that limited me too much because I was used to moving and transitioning, and yet I always wondered why I felt alone. I always wondered why I always felt like I was in the outs. In my close relationships, I wouldn't want them to venture out beyond my comfort zone because it would limit me in my ability to move, because now they are being empowered by other people, and that limits my ability to move on and deal with the situation. I wanted to be involved in everything, but I did not want to commit to anything. We see this in churches. People want the church to commit to them, be there for them, help them out, yet they don't want to commit to the church because they don't want anybody to have claim over them. We constantly want people to commit to us, but then we don't want to commit back. For example, I know of situations where, there are wives who marry their husbands knowing that they are in ministry and they love seeing the husband up there. They love the benefits of being in ministry, but yet they don't realize the work that goes behind the scenes, and they don't like the commitment that happens with that. Well, guess what? That's part of it. Now, as a pastor, I do believe there's boundaries. I do a date night with my wife every week. I spend time with my kids. There's only a certain amount of nights I'll go out in the week, and then with meals, I make sure I have a certain amount of meals with them a week. So those are important. But sometimes someone's wonderlust can cause them not to ever experience true fulfillment because they're not committed to anything worthwhile, and they prevent other people from doing it as well. I can tell you right now, I'm committed in my family, in my job as a pastor, in the things that I've been committed to, but I've had to say no to a lot of things because every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. So there's a lot of things I've liked to do, I've had to let go. But I'll tell you one thing, I've never been more fulfilled. I used to think, man, I don't want to get married. I don't want to have kids because I won't be able to do all the fun things I want to do. I won't be able to travel as much. I won't be able to do the things that have the flexibility as much. I'll just tell you, from the guy who would never nail down, the guy who would never commit, it's way better on this side. And that doesn't mean that you have to get married right now, because not everybody is called to be married. Most people will. But it is time to rethink some things. If you're married, talk to your spouse. Are they happy? Are they having a bigger desire to commit to things that you don't want to be? Remember, they're not you. They're not going to be the same as you. They're not going to have the same giftings as you. Are you willing to let them grow to the degree that God wants to grow them? Or do you want them to be just like you? So my wife and I both love people, but I'm an extrovert. What that means is I can be with a group of people much longer than my wife can be. If you see her in a public setting, you might think she's an extrovert at first because she's really good with people. But what we figured out early on is that I could talk to people forever, and eventually my wife kind of tires out. And two things could happen that are very unhealthy. Number one, I could ask her and place an expectation on her that she has to be at every meeting and every situation as much as I do. And guess what? She's going to burn out. She's going to be resentful. She's going to hate life. Or I could honor her giftings and her makeup and what God has called her to be, and let her be involved with what she can be, and then be freed up to get her alone time to charge up. But also she could place a demand on me that I could only be out as much as her endurance could last. And guess what? One, I wouldn't be very effective in what I do, but I would hate life. I would be miserable. See, as a husband, I've got to be loving to her needs, but as a wife, she also has to be loving and honoring of my needs. So we have to figure that out, and there's sacrifice on both ends. See, commitment's a big deal, and our culture has a lie that says that commitments will ruin your fun. But what we've seen in studies and what we see in the Word of God is commitments actually are where we find the most fulfilling. But studies have shown that commitments actually help reveal fulfillment in many people's lives. Now, there is a true point of to what are you committing to, but that's a different video that we can do later on. But we're assuming that these commitments are things that will honor God, that are fulfilling for yourself and perhaps even your family, for your church, for your jobs. Commitment matters. And if you are uncommitted, you are probably unfulfilled. So what do you do? How do you handle this commitment? 2 quick things. Number 1, ask God to reveal to you if you've been uncommitted because of pride or fear or laziness. Help him to open up your eyes. And then ask him, what would he have you commit to? So maybe it is to stay at your job for the next year and not quit when you want to, or when your emotions tell you to. Or maybe it's to commit to a small group for the next 6 months. Maybe it's to start spiritual disciplines for the next 40 days. Ask him, Lord, would you open up my eyes if I'm being a little flighty, if I'm letting wonderlust control my life? And number 2, God, would you please show me what can I commit to and for how long? If you do that, you may begin to see something change in your life. Well, again, if you have any comments, comment down below, share, like, subscribe. Hope to see you later. I have another devotional coming up soon. I'm really excited about the difference between love and enmeshment. What is enmeshment? Well, it's essentially fake love. But how do you know the difference? See you soon.